Hello, everybody. Thank you for waiting. It's now 1 minute past the hour, so let's kick off. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome you to this webinar today, which is all about Dashboard Server 6.0. And for those of you who don't know Squared Up that well, we have two products. We have Dashboard Server, which is our on-premise product all around SCON, and we have a cloud product as well. This is about the former, our on-premise release, and it's obviously a big one. It's a major release. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm starting with a quick introduction for those of you who aren't familiar. So I'm Bruce Cullen. I'm Director of Engineering. I'm also Product Manager. And the reason why you have me here today is because I'm Product Manager for Dashboard Server. So this is a very exciting day and a very exciting release for me. But I have someone else here with me who I'll let introduce himself.
Yes, hello, hey Bruce, hey everybody on the call. I'm Jason Bedreau, VP of Product and Marketing at Squared Up, and Bruce is going to take the bulk of the webinar and the overview of the new Dashboard Server today, but he's going to introduce me towards the back half, and I'll share some of the other updates across the cloud product as well.
It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me. All right, let's dig into the good stuff now. But before we dig into 6.0, let's just take a little bit of a trip down memory lane and look backwards a little bit. This is important because Dashboard Server 6.0 is not a single release, but it's the culmination of multiple years worth of engineering. The last time we did a major release was back in December of 2020, which was our 5.0 release. So clearly that was quite some time ago, some 2+ years ago. And it was a big release for us. We had a complete redesign of our open access dashboarding technology, a whole bunch of new visualizations for Web API, and a new look and feel. But since then, there have been multiple changes to the product, from quite large features, from integrations, from things like Splunk and Elasticsearch, to new visualizations, like in the most recent version, in 5.9, the date heat map, but also the sunburst. So there is a lot of engineering and a lot of effort that has gone into bringing us to 5.0 release. Just to highlight some key bits and pieces, to recap some key pieces from the last couple of releases, starting with Dashboard Server 5.8, which was about 6 months ago now. There were a few things that we did in this release that are particularly noteworthy, which I'm just going to quickly highlight because things get missed. We're all busy at the end of the day. The first one is this top left visualization here. This is basically conditional formatting on the bar charts, which are quite useful for calling out particular issues or where everything is okay. And then strangely, in the middle, something that's quite small and seems relatively insignificant, but really is quite important, which is the tick marks on the line graph. Now, this is really useful for where you've got something like this here. We've got 4 data points that are basically in a straight line. Is this 2 data points in a straight line drawn between them, or 4? That's important information to know. And with 5.8 and beyond, you can show that. Then we have the hosting stack here. The hosting stack is not a new visualization. It's existed for a very long time, but it wasn't possible to manually add that tile. You had to do JSON hackery to get it on the dashboard. So you added that capability, but also we'll now show you power state and maintenance mode state as well, which is really, really important. Because if something's switched off, it's not likely to be happy. So entirely logical. And with the monitors over here, we had the ability to group by their health, which was quite an useful improvement. And on the block tile, we had the ability to sort by state before, but now we sort by state and by both power state and maintenance mode state. So you can surface the things that have maintenance mode or are off first, which is quite useful. So a bunch of key improvements to visualizations in that release. Then moving forward to 5.9, so I'm only really picking out the highlights here because there's more here than I could go into. So I've got 2 things I'm going to particularly highlight from 5.9. So we have the vertical bar chart here, which essentially is a horizontal bar chart like you would know and love, but vertically, so that you make better use of your screen real estate. And then my favorite of our most recent round of visualizations, the date heat map, which lets you overlay alerts and event type data on a calendar to show you where there are more and less of them. That features in today's webinar as well. And these really are, the things that are new in the area of visualizations. There's plenty more in both of these releases that I'm not going to go into because, frankly, I'd be here for triple the time because we're talking about multiple releases. So with that in mind, let's move on to what's new in Dashboard Server 6.0, which is very, very exciting. So there's some teasers on here. I'm not going to go through this dashboard in detail because all of the details will come out over the course of this webinar. So there is a new visualization, but there's more that is more interesting in my view as well to understand. And the first thing, which is alluded to from the previous slide, is auditing. So auditing is one of those features that is very important when you're in a high compliance environment where you have regulators that require knowledge of who's done what. And it comes up from time to time as a requirement. But the other requirement that we've been asked for more that's lurking in here is this: dashboard and perspective lifecycle events. So the most important thing here is we get asked quite frequently, who's doing what with the dashboards? Are the dashboards that aren't being viewed at all? And historically, it was not possible to answer that question. With 6.0, I'm very pleased to announce we can answer that question. There's more in auditing than I'm going to be able to cover in this webinar, but there's a hint to all of that stuff here on the screen. It requires a SQL database. We're going to have a look at how it works in more detail in a second, but that's our first new and quite massive feature in my view in this release. What it looks like is typically like this. So a table worth of audit events, but bear in mind, we're a dashboarding company. We could do better than simply a table of event data, but we'll see all of that when we get into demos. I'll do that live rather than cheat and do that from slides. But you get the idea here. We have audit events over time, which is very important. For our next feature, I'm going to bring in some extra data to really explain why we did it rather than what it is. So this data is from the Big SCOM survey, which is our SCOMathon annual survey to figure out how you guys out there who are using SCOM actually are monitoring your IT landscapes. And we ask you, among other things, what other tools do you use for monitoring, in addition, obviously, to SCOM? And you'll see consistently year on year, there are some key themes, some key things that come out. And some of these tools, so for example, Azure Monitor, Splunk and Elasticsearch, which is part of the ELK stack, we already have integrations for, but there's some key ones that we don't, and we're looking to help address that in this release. And so the next feature I'm very happy to introduce is a native SolarWinds integration to Dashboard Server. So this is great because clearly it's out there, it's highly adopted and highly used. It supports almost all of the visualizations that Dashboard Server is capable of, certainly all the ones we could easily hook up. And it will take SolarWinds query language to drive. So a really exciting feature and should mean that Dashboard Server can be more useful as your single pane of glass for all of your observability tooling. Moving on to back to the Big SCOM survey. So we've talked about SolarWinds, but there's one other data point. One other thing I would like to pull out from this, this list of tools, which is Prometheus. Now, Prometheus is not the most widely adopted monitoring tool out there. For those of you who aren't aware, it's a time series metrics-driven monitoring tool, which is open source and free. And if I went to KubeCon earlier in the year, and it felt like if you take all of IT and you slice it down the middle, you've got the Microsoft world on one side and Linux and open source on the other. It's not quite so clear cut, but that's how it kind of felt. There were 10,000 people there, and in one of the sessions there was a call out for who's using which tool and this tool and that tool. One of the call outs was for who's using Prometheus, and the entire room's hands went up, which was quite interesting to me. I had come across it before. The other thing that's interesting is both in the data I have from the Big SCOM survey, but from other data points, Prometheus adoption is significantly growing. So it's one that while you may not be using today, it's very likely you've at least heard of and are considering for the future. So for my second trick, I bring you the Prometheus native integration in Dashboard Server, which is great. And again, we've hooked this up to the majority of visualizations that are compatible with time series data. And this is achieved via use of PromQL, Prometheus Query Language supports, which is great. We'll get into demos later, but just to give you a teaser, as you would expect, they're all driven by queries. On the right-hand side here, we have Prometheus, and on the left-hand side, SolarWinds, so PromQL and SolarWinds Query Language. The rest of the UX and experience is very much like you would expect from such a tool. So very, very useful bread and butter for the rest of your monitoring tools outside of SCOM. Now, you might be waiting for me to go into a demo, but that's not it. We have a few more bits and pieces to mention. Where would a major release be without a new visualization? You may have seen it alluded to in my opening slides, but we have a new visualization, which is that column graph. So this is not a stacked bar, as it may look from the graph on the right-hand side. The bars are overlaid on top of each other, which is why you see something like this, where the bars aren't perfectly lined up because their timestamps don't perfectly line up. This was requested by customers and looked to be a pretty obvious use case for us, so we included it. But that's not all. It's not all about snazzy slides for things. There are a few other improvements which are worth mentioning. So date heat match, I mentioned this new visualization in 5.9. So in this release, we have added the ability to aggregate data from multiple integration tiles. So this is really, really cool because in past releases, in 5.9, you would have had to have pulled back all the data and let us do the aggregation on the client, which clearly is not highly performant. You can now request aggregated data back from the data source, and I have a demo of this, so you'll be able to see what this looks like in a minute. And the other thing is squared up cloud aligned color palette and styling. So I said at the top of this webinar, we have two products. The other one is our cloud offering. So because these tools are often used side by side, we wanted to make it clear that these two tools are from the same company with consistent styling. So they're nicer to use alongside each other. And that is enough slides for me for now before we get into a demo. Now, while I'm bringing up the demo in the background here, just to say, if you have any questions as we get into this, please do stick them in the Q&A box. I will address them at the end. I'm going to try and not tackle them mid-flow so I don't break my flow. So here we are. We're looking at Dashboard Server 6.0, a very exciting new release. And this is the dashboard that I screenshotted for my slides. And the first thing that I'll show you is this column graph. So you get a better view for it when I'm actually demoing it. So you can see the various bars and how they stack up against each other when I hover over the various components. So right here, we're looking at SCOM % processor time, which is obviously one use of the thing. But quite a useful visualization. If I stick this in edit mode and go to select tile, you will see it comes up here as a new type of new visualization, a new tile. Obviously, the rest of the panes and the scoping are as per previous release. One other little thing to show here is on display, we have the ability to make the bars solid or not. So solid is the default and it would align with the rest of our visualizations. But in keeping with aligning the color palette with our cloud products, we now have the ability to make our bars transparent with this visualization, which is very cool. So that's the first thing to show. The other thing which you kind of see as you're looking around the product is it's got a new style. So we see more dark blues than we saw before. The bars are a bit more rounded than they would have been in previous releases, which is very cool, gives it a modern, fresh feel, and we've adopted a new font as well. So those are the first things to show. For my next trick, I'm going to move on to a different dashboard, all based around SolarWinds. So SolarWinds is obviously bread and butter for observability, but typically for network monitoring. Obviously, you know, a dashboard that shows SolarWinds data is what you were expecting to see. I'm going to actually show you how you go about setting it up to start with. So it's in here with all the rest of our integrations, as is Prometheus, which I'll come on to next. And it's really quite simple to set up. It's a case of providing instance name, URL, username, and password. You also have the option to ignore invalid SSL certs. While obviously it's best practice to make sure SSL certs are valid, there's also reality, and we know that the vast majority of customers, or maybe not the vast majority, a number of customers haven't got that case to be true. The same is true for Prometheus. We're setting up Prometheus. Instance name, URL, username, and password, and the similar ability to ignore invalid SSL certs. So really, really simple to get set up. So going back to my SolarWinds dashboard here, I'll pop this one in edit mode, and let's have a look at one of these guys here. When you're scoping, you'll start off by going back here to the main list of tiles. It's hidden here under integrations. You click into integrations, and then you'll see SolarWinds, which is obviously one of our integrations, to see the list of possible tiles that you can use with the SolarWinds data source. Now, the most important thing here is selecting the provider, which is pre-set up, and then having your SolarWinds query language here. So in this case, I've mapped up-down status from Prometheus to the block states effectively with SolarWinds. All of that is done through the UI. And it varies slightly visualization on visualization, but you get the gist. It's all entirely driven by SolarWinds query language, and that's true regardless of which of these I click on. There's a few more examples down here. CPU as another example, all SolarWinds driven. The most important piece here is we've parameterized the time component. So there we are. And that's really all there is to see for SolarWinds. So really the sky's the limit with what you can create and dashboard from SolarWinds. Moving on to Prometheus, it's a very, very similar story. I've already shown you how SolarWinds, Prometheus, is set up. So when it comes to editing these, it's a very similar story. So it's a case of providing the query. This is PromQL, obviously. And where it's time sensitive, you'll use the mustache syntaxing to parameterize the time format component, which is great. But everything else in here is entirely familiar. No real sort of changes to how you configure the visualizations, which is important because clearly everyone's familiar with that. It just kind of works. So if I go and add a new visualization, just to give you an idea, just to reiterate some things. If I go configure on this new tile, we've got integrations here, and then we've got Prometheus. All the visualizations you'd expect for time series data here, including the date heat map. Then it's a case of providing scope, selecting the provider, and pasting in your PromQL. And it really is that simple. So that is very cool. One additional thing worth noting with Prometheus, if I go into the edit of this guy here, which is my Sparklines visualization, which is a little bit further down on, which tab is it on? Oh, now this is where did I get my demo right? Data step, here it is. So you can adjust the coarseness of the data by sliding data step. You can obviously also do this with PromQL. This is quite important when talking about aggregated data and giving you that control. So clearly it's the same data, but the more aggregated I make it, the finer the points on my Sparkline. So there you go. Let's set it back to something a bit more sane. And that is Prometheus. So next thing to talk about is going to be all, let's do date heat map improvements next. Let's do that one. So to see, it looks exactly the same to the eye. The first thing you may or may not have noticed is the original column over here, which is what we shipped with the date heat map in 5.9, loaded slower than the column on the right-hand side. And that's because you get an idea for the data we're pulling back. So for the top date heat map, exactly the same data source, if I pop these in edit mode, is pulling back data points that are not aggregated. So we just have a timestamp here essentially. This is pulling back data from SQL essentially, and this is my query. If I pop this one in edit and stick these next to each other, you'll get the difference here essentially. So the gist on the right hand side is we're pulling back aggregated data. Now, in 5.9, this was not possible, which meant that this crunching to produce this visualization was happening client side, which is why it was slower. Now, in a Noddy demo example, like my one, it makes little difference. But in a production scale system, this is an important point, as clearly a SQL server is going to have more grunt to be able to deal with requesting and serving up aggregated data other than client side that we're going to be able to do. So not lots to see, but it's a very important feature for making date heat maps scale as expected. Next thing we're going to look at here is auditing. So auditing is a massive deal, essentially, for our customers who are compliance driven, and of course for being able to see what people are doing. Now, when you set this up, you have the option to import a dashboard pack, which looks like this. And these are some of the example dashboards that let you see auditing for various aspects of Squared Up. So auditing for dashboards and perspectives, for EAs, folders, users, and the administration of auditing, because obviously you want to know when somebody changes auditing itself. So once it's set up, that is possible. The other thing you'll see here is an Explore Audit Events button. Now, obviously, seeing pretty dashboards for audit events is great, but what auditing is really sort of super useful for is being able to figure out who's doing what. Now, to demonstrate this, I'm going to find a dashboard that should be under here, should be under Teams, SCOM, Self-Maintenance. Oh, hang on, this is just a folder. So my dashboard has been moved by someone or deleted by someone or whatever, and I can't see it. What's going on? Well, with the power of auditing, I can find it. So if I go back into Explore Audit Events, I have the ability to search my audit events by user, content, team folder, and enterprise application. So I know the dashboard was called SCOM Self-Maintenance. So I type in SCOM and you'll see self-maintenance comes up, which is great. Now, if we have multiple things with the same title, which happens from time to time, then you'll see multiple entries, but you'll see underneath they have a unique GUID. In this case, I only have one, and this will be possible to search for a dashboard, even if that dashboard is deleted, because we're searching the audit data that's stored in a separate SQL database. So when I select this, the next thing you'll see underneath is I have a checkbox here to include read events. Now, if we, in a busy environment, were to check this, clearly we'd end up with a lot of data, which is fine. Sometimes it's useful, but if you're trying to figure out what happened to your favorite dashboard, that isn't necessarily useful. So the ability to filter it is important. If I now collapse this, let's see what happened to my dashboard. So you can see about an hour ago, this dashboard was moved to a folder, team folder called Private Dumping Ground. Who did it? It was me, a guy called Bruce. Oh man. So clearly here it is under Private Dumping Ground. Here is my self-maintenance dashboard, alive and well. The other thing that's interesting about that audit trail, if I go back and research for that same dashboard, is you can see that Bruce has done a bunch of other things. He's unpublished this. He's moved it around multiple times. I'm starting to wonder what else this Bruce guy has been up to. Let's have a look. So if I now search by user and search for Bruce, oops, helps if I can type my own name, int Bruce, there I am. Let's see what else Bruce has been up to. Well, Bruce has been up to a number of things, including deletes here. Interesting. Obviously, seeing this data in a table form is great, it's useful, and obviously you can export this to Excel if you want to sift and sort this in Excel. Obviously, it's all stored in a SQL database, so you can grab it from there too. But also, we can visualize it because ultimately we're a dashboarding tool. So I can see that Bruce has mostly been moving dashboards around, but also he has been doing some deletes. He's deleted a couple of things. If we wanted to sort of drill in, essentially, we could obviously filter down further by specific type of event. And you can see all the categories for things that are possible to be audited in the first place. And the other thing that's important is the time frame over which we're pulling this data back. 6 months versus 2 hours, 1 hour, whatever, is a very different perspective. Now, clearly, this is a demo lab, so it's not got enterprise level scale, but you can see if I go back to 6 months, I have a relatively significant number of events. already. So the ability to filter and refine this is very, very important. So there we go, auditing, great new capability. Other thing I'll show you quickly is how this is set up, essentially. So in this case, it's under system settings, and there's a tab for auditing, and we provide a connection string. Very, very simple, and we specify what we would like to audit. Do we want to audit the read events or not? Because an option is to not do it. You could choose to event only write or session information, like logins and logouts, for example. So that is auditing, a very powerful new feature. So there we are. I'm going to go back to slides to continue for the next piece, because that is not all. For those of you who are familiar with EAMX, EAMX is improved even further in the 6.0 release. We have a new plugin for our cloud products for Quest's Foglight products, which is great. Primarily used for monitoring databases, was requested by a customer. But obviously, a plugin for our cloud products means all of this data can be pulled back into SCOM and visualized in Dashboard Server as well. Also, Jenkins is new. Jenkins, which is this guy on the little like butler dude here on the right-hand side of my slide. Jenkins is an on-premise build tool, typically used for compiling code and spitting out the resultant files. I've used it myself in past lives. It's very widely deployed. Any objects we bring into SquareUp Cloud, we can bring into SCOM to visualize on dashboards. There are also improvements to existing plugins. So starting with the GCP, Google Cloud one, we have added a bunch of stuff to this one. We have added PubSub, Firestore, build, and workflows. So if you're consuming those services from Google Cloud, EAMX is improved for you too. But we have a large roadmap of bits and pieces where some of these are further off than others, but quite a lot of these are now quite close to being done. So Artifactory, for example, here is very close to shipping, like in the next few days. And Artifactory is a repository management platform for deployed and built software. We used to use it ourselves for distributing Dashboard Server. So there will be a plugin for that for cloud, and you'll be able to benefit from as well. So Prometheus is an interesting one to mention on this slide, because obviously we've just built a native Prometheus integration for Dashboard Server. And so why am I talking about it? Well, with what we're about to release for cloud, if your data is semantic conventions compatible, so semantic conventions is a standard for defining data as defined as part of OpenTelemetry, then we can actually create objects from your time series data from Prometheus in cloud, which lets us bring that data into SCOM. So that's an interesting one that's worth highlighting. And then why am I talking about Web API? Well, Web API, you have that ability in Dashboard Server. You've had that ability for some time. But with cloud, we're working on the ability to pull objects into cloud with Web API, which means you can pull data from anywhere, create objects for it in cloud, which then get pulled into SCOM to visualize in Dashboard Server, which is why I'm talking about it. So these are all there or thereabouts, not miles out. There are a whole bunch of improvements that we've made in our cloud dashboarding product as well, as far as integrations are concerned. So this felt like it's not directly relevant, but if you're an EAMX customer, this will be of interest to you. We'll hear more about EAMX in a moment. But these will have no bearing on essentially getting data into SCOM. And the first example of this is Azure cost. So Azure cost is essentially how much money am I spending on cloud? Is that cost amortized or actual? Am I using any reserved instances or savings plans? And what savings am I getting with those things? There's no object data for those improvements, but you can now see all of those things in cloud, which is great. And that's released already. There's a whole bunch of bits and pieces that are in planning that will have make little difference to pulling objects back into SCOM, but will significantly improve your experience when you're using cloud natively. So obviously SCOM itself, we're working on the SCOM plugin in cloud. We're working on a cloud native PowerShell plugin so that you execute PowerShell scripts in cloud without any on-prem dependencies. We're working on a significant improvement to our Jira plugin. We have a JavaScript plugin to let you execute JavaScript as well, which is great. And Azure DevOps is getting a good lick of paint as well, with better out-of-the-box dashboards and more depth for release pipelines. So you get the point. Now, taking a step back here, I'm the product manager for both Dashboard Server and for the plugins piece of Cloud. Now, this is where you guys come in. I will not build a plugin for no one. There is no point in me doing that with my team. So I really want to know what you would like for us to plug into next and why. So for this, I'd like to introduce our feedback site, feedback.squareup.com, where we're asking you actively for contributions. And the things you see here end up on the roadmap based on suggestions from customers. And so I really would like to know what you would like to connect to next. And now you'll be pleased to hear you get a break from me, and I'm going to reintroduce Jason to tell you a bit more about Cloud and what EAMX is. So welcome back, Jason.
Hello again. Yeah, so you can click out into the next slide there, Bruce. If you've had a chance to see some of our webinars on Squared Up Cloud or some of our product releases, then the last couple of slides that Bruce just talked about with plugins and with EAMX probably made a lot of sense to you. For those of you that maybe just haven't had a chance to see Squared Up Cloud in action or engage with that, I did want to just zoom out a little bit before I actually just hand it back to Bruce and talk about Squared Up Cloud and Squared Up Dashboard Server, how these two products are similar, how they're different, and then how we're stitching them together into a really unified solution for our customers. So if you'd click on, actually I can click, can't I? Yeah, I'm sharing control as well. So obviously you're all here on a Squared Up Dashboard Server 6.0 webinar. I'm gonna assume most of you are Dashboard Server and SCOM users. So everything that Bruce just talked through there talks about our deep SCOM dashboards, and particularly a lot of those new integrations is adding visibility on top of that. Of course, Dashboard Server is hosted on-prem, and I'm going to try to click this time. Whereas Squared Up Cloud is our cloud-hosted solution, as the name implies. And what's similar about it is it's all about data visualizations, about surfacing insights from your data. What we recognize with our cloud solution is that more and more organizations are moving into the cloud, and hosting on-prem infrastructure and monitoring that with SCOM is not the only thing that people are doing. And so we built that taking plenty of inspiration from our Dashboard Server solution, namely the ability to surface insights, visualizations, and actually SCOM's underlying object model, which we've tried to replicate in Squared Up Cloud. And we did that using a technology we're calling the observability data mesh. So we have 60 plus data source plugins within Squared Up Cloud, including, of course, SCOM, and including SolarWinds and Prometheus, and a lot of the things that Bruce just highlighted on the previous slides. And when you install, or rather sign in and sign up for Squared Up Cloud, you can immediately start to plug into those data sources and index the objects from within them and stitch all those objects together into our data mesh. So we do have these as two different solutions, and which solution you have is probably going to depend on where you are in your own monitoring strategy and your kind of sort of cloud or digital transformation journey. But what we're trying to do is make the best of both worlds accessible to our customers, and we're doing that with our EAMX tier. So a lot of you on the webinar are already EAMX customers, or if you're not, you're probably an EAM customer. That's our enterprise application mapping and monitoring. The X is for extensibility, extending that visibility beyond SCOM. And again, we have integrations native to Dashboard Server, namely the new ones that Bruce talked about. But the ability and the flexibility that Squared Up Cloud offers is the ability to recognize those as objects that can then be rolled into a unified object model, and gives you the ability to sort of explore that data a lot more interactively than you could necessarily do. So we give you a lot of options and flexibility. That EAMX license, which lives kind of in between these two products, does a couple things. One, it gives you access to Squared Up Cloud. So you get dedicated licenses to Squared Up Cloud to do dedicated dashboarding on top of any of those data sources, those 60 plus data sources that we have. And the other thing that it does is it allows you to roll up the health from any of those data sources into your SCOM object model, and therefore surface that within your Squared Up Dashboard Server instance. So again, it is that flexibility. You can continue to see Squared Up Dashboard Server as your single pane of glass, and with more of these integrations that we're offering native to Dashboard Server, it is a better and better single pane of glass. But as SCOM becomes maybe less of a footprint in your monitoring strategy, you might start to think about how SquaredUp Cloud is that single pane of glass. So you could see either one of them, the ability to surface the health from within SquaredUp Cloud to Dashboard Server allows you basically not to have to change how you're using SquaredUp and SCOM today. So just an update on the licensing tiers within the Dashboard Server. Just as a reminder, we have 4 today. There's Teams, which is all about surfacing visibility and allowing you to share that visibility across teams within your organization. We have our Connect tier. I guess we're going to come back to that in a second. We have our application monitoring tier, which is all about modeling your data in the form of enterprise applications, mapping that with our Veda. And then we have our Connect tier. Connect tier in the past has always been our integrations tier. And we have native integrations for the ones listed here and some others as well, Splunk and ServiceNow, and that's where our PowerShell and Web API extensibility lives. But we've, as we've built out our cloud product, we've kind of created a little bit of a area of potential confusion because we're also saying that cloud is the ability to plug into all those different data sources. And Bruce talked about a couple of different slides there. We have our Dashboard Server integrations and we have our cloud integrations. And our cloud integrations can be surfaced into Dashboard Server. So we're trying to untangle this a little bit here. EAMX, again, powered by cloud and those 60+ data sources, is our sort of integrations plus tier, and it's powered by cloud. What we want to do is actually streamline this. We want to kind of just make this into a more logical view. So what we did is we're actually removing the Connect tier for sale to new customers, which most of you here are existing customers. From new customers' perspective, our integrations tier is now EAMX. And so we're unifying this into a single view. EAMX becomes our integrations tier. All the Connect integrations are now available within that tier, and how it's going to come together, my slides will animate, is this what it looks like. So we'll have Teams, EAM, and EAMX. What does that mean for you as an existing customer? Well, like as I mentioned, the Connect tier is now withdrawn from sale. If you want those integrations, the place to find them is in our dedicated integrations tier, EAMX. If you are an existing Connect customer, then you can continue to, and I think that's my next point, you can continue to renew your existing license. We're not going to force you to EAMX. The Connect integrations that are available in the EAMX tier are available for new customers. So with the features that Bruce just spent the last several minutes talking about, most of those you'll find within the Teams tier, auditing, the column graph, the new color palette. That's available to everybody that's using SquaredUp Dashboard Server. And therefore, the SolarWinds and Prometheus integrations live within that EAMX, the new integrations tier, which is now the combination of our Connect tiers. So hopefully that all makes sense. Again, we're not forcing anybody to change the tiers that they're using today. If you want to continue to do that and renew on your existing Connect tier or your existing EAM tier, all that's available to you. But we are trying to streamline into a single sort of extensibility, single pane of glass tier. That's our new EAMX. So with that, I'm actually going to hand back to you, Bruce, to talk about the upgrade path.
Thank you. So great. Thank you for that, Jason. So it's clear to say that this is a big new release for us, and there's loads of cool new stuff in it. And so it's a great pleasure that I have in saying it's available to get right now. Go to download.squareup.com and download Dashboard Server 6.0. Unlike with some past major releases, in-place upgrade is our recommended approach, our recommended upgrade path. If you adopt the release candidate builds, you'll get priority support. And we're planning general availability. Typically, it's 2 weeks after the release candidate, but it depends on your feedback, which is why I'd like for you to download the release candidate and tell me if it's okay for you, if there are any issues, any quirks. So good news. Now, while we've been talking, there have been Q&A questions whizzing by, and I said we're not going to address them all as we go. But one thing that has come out that is quite an important question in my view is about to be answered, which is what does that mean for Dashboard Server Azure Edition? This is where I announce the future, essentially, which is we're going to be end-of-lifing the Azure Dashboard, the Dashboard Server Azure Edition. It's been around for quite some time. We released it in October of 2019, and it was targeted at Azure applications, resources, and services. And then later we enhanced it, adding cost and application insights. But basically, all of that stuff is possible in cloud and some. And I don't just mean additional integrations, there's additional depth within these existing targets. So in other words, there isn't really that much point in continuing to sell it. So what does this actually mean in reality? Well, it means that as of today, we're not going to be accepting new sales of Dashboard Server Azure Edition, and we'll be announcing end of maintenance on the 26th of September 2024. So in other words, a year from today, which means no maintenance, no security fixes, no bug fixes, no features. We are still allowing existing customers to renew. And of course, we're still supporting it while we're allowing customers to have it. We will obviously always provide support, just not necessarily bug fixes. So hopefully that answers some of those questions and addresses some of the why. The other big why is it's Azure is a cloud native offering and service. It would make sense to have a cloud native observability portal and tool to go with it rather than an on-prem one. So there we are. There's one more announcement to make, which is the end of life for Dashboard Server 4.x. So I went back as far as 5.0 in my slides at the beginning of this webinar, but Dashboard Server 4.0 was released in mid-2018. In fact, it's the first thing I worked on as Squared Up before we spun out Cookdown. So quite some time ago, sort of 5-6 years ago. And the last 4.x series release was in October of 2020. So again, multiple years ago. It's already not maintained. We're already not making changes to it. So we're actually going to be withdrawing it from availability. So the downloads will be removed from the download site on the 3rd of October. So it gives you a little bit of time if you still need the download file for some reason. And we're actually announcing end of support on the 26th of September 2024. So no support on or after this date. Obviously, we have Dashboard Server 5 and 6. It makes a lot more sense from two perspectives. All the cool new things we've been working on in that 5x timeline, and of course 6.0 are never going to be seen if you're stuck on 4.5 or some crafty old version like that. So it makes a lot of sense to upgrade. And from our perspective, it spreads our resources thinner, which means we can innovate less in our Dashboard Server product line. So that is the other announcement I had to make. Thank you for joining me, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for joining me wherever you are. And go download Dashboard Server 6.0 now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.